Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Welcome to another October, where the night's air brings a chill down our spines, and even the morning light will just deliver an ominous feeling instead of a respite. Plus the morning brings Moarte, as per usual. Keeping with our standard policy of October trilogies, this will be the last October to look at a Nightmare on Elm Street comics for the majority of the month, and the past is coming back to bite us a bit. We're going to cover 3 different stories from 3 different publishers. This week we go back to Innovation, next week back to Avatar, and finally something from Wildstorm in 2 weeks. The only other publishers who made Nightmare on Elm Street were the 2 Marvel issues, which Moarte did already, and Trident Comics, which were just reprints of the Innovation and Marvel books. Why not Wildstorm for all 3, since it's the last major publisher? Well, I'll get to that in 2 weeks. For now, let's talk Innovation Publishing. I discussed the company itself for the most part back when I did the reviews of Nightmares on Elm Street. The series is not good, but I give it credit for trying some original ideas and for following up on both Nancy and Alice and giving closure to their stories. The comics were basically a way to close the book on the old series from movies 1 through 5 and transition things into where they were at the beginning of Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Innovation did an adaptation of that film and then followed it up with what we have today, A Nightmare on Elm Street: The Beginning, a prequel that explains how Freddy Krueger became, well, how he was. Freddy's Dead had a brief montage that zipped through most of his troubled childhood and his eventual serial killings as the Springwood Slasher, but this was meant to go into more detail. Unfortunately, Innovation folded before the series was fully published, meaning what we've got here is basically an incomplete story. I mean, geez, how will we ever find out what happened to that Freddy Krueger guy? Nightmares, the Freddy's Dead adaptation, and The Beginning were all written by prolific LGBT rights advocate and science fiction author Andy Mangels. Apologies for any mispronunciation, and major credit to him and his website, which contains extensive information on a lot of his work. And of course, that includes his stuff for Innovation. As part of the promotion tour for Freddy's Dead, he actually appeared at a mock funeral for Freddy made by New Line Cinema and delivered the eulogy. Neat. I'll talk some more about the unreleased comics at the end, but in the meantime though, let's dig into A Nightmare on Elm Street: The Beginning, number 1 and number 2.
Welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a birdie hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Linkara, coins, robots, Amazon and trucks. Linkara, this comic sucks. Linkara.
Holy crap, issue 1's cover is awesome! It's busy, probably busier than it needs to be, but there's a difference between what we see here and what we saw last year with the Paranoia miniseries. While there's a ton of stuff going on here, it's all distinct and I can tell what it is I'm looking at. Checking out the details is rewarding here versus a chore on those, where stuff got lost amidst all the lines. We've got a tree made of what I presume to be a ton of human souls. What sort of fertilizer do you use for a soul tree anyway? And does it mind if squirrels live in it? We've got some people burning in the background, a giant Freddy claw with more souls reflected in the metal, a doll with its forehead cut, which now just makes me want to see Freddy vs. Talkie Tina. And finally, a few bones and another Freddy glove. I know the giant one is probably meant to be just artsy, but I can't help but think it's like a baby glove overseen by a huge parent. Someday, you'll grow up to be Neutro's Freddy glove, kid! We open on a woman dreaming of shots of a dilapidated workbench, and on said workbench happens to be Freddy's glove. A figure in the dream puts on the glove and slices at a mirror that apparently Spider-Man webbed up given how thick the cobwebs are. However, once the mirror is uncovered, it's clear that the woman put on the glove and is looking back at herself. Weird as that is, it gets weirder when she wakes up and the glove is actually on her hand, which she has used to slice up her surroundings while she slept. Some people wear blindfolds while they sleep, others wear murderous weapons. We've all got our quirks. We quickly learn that this is Maggie Burroughs, the heroine from Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Not surprising that we're tying into that one, given Innovation's adaptation and rights and whatnot. However, that does mean I need to give a bit of spoilers for this 26-year-old movie. Just a warning in case you intend to marathon the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and don't know about this. In that movie, it was revealed that Maggie is actually Freddy's daughter. It's a retcon that actually kind of works for the most part. Freddy was a serial killer before he became a dream demon, so it figures he might have had a normal life. In this case, he had a wife and daughter. He murdered his wife when she discovered that his man cave in the basement contained a ton of different claw glove variations and, well, enough proof of his proclivities. Maggie suppressed the trauma of this because of her young age at the time and was adopted while Freddy was burned alive by the townspeople. The only unusual thing is that you would think someone would have mentioned his family in one of the previous movies. It's not really the kind of thing you forget. In any event, Maggie's nightmare brings her to Doc and Tracy, the other two survivors of the movie. They ask her what's up. It came out of my dream this morning. Oh my god, that washcloth is satin! What was supposed to be in it was the Freddy glove she pulled out of her dream, but of course it's gone now. They're shocked by what she's saying. Freddy's body turned into dust after we killed him. So did his glove. And by body, I mean the bloody chunks that were left because we blew him the hell up with a pipe bomb. Doc wonders if she's been seeing Freddy in her dreams again, although I'd be more worried about how in this one panel she's mummifying, and in still this other one she's apparently melting. Anyway, she hasn't been seeing him per se, but I have been seeing things about him. I've been having flashbacks, I guess you could call them. They're about Freddy, but he's not there. I am. I've been dreaming about Freddy's past, but I've been in it instead of him. It's like I'm reliving his past. And I've got to say, a lot more knitting than I was expecting in Freddy Krueger's past. She's worried that Freddy is trying to take over her mind to come back to life, which, yeah, not an unprecedented concern in this franchise. Doc thinks Maggie's just experiencing some psychic resonances from when she went inside his memories in the movie. However, that doesn't explain how she had the glove on when she woke up, and for some reason she suddenly collapsed into Tracy's arms, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure she was on the opposite side of the room.
Space is warped and time is bendable.
With no other options, Maggie decides to head back to Springwood to see if she can get a handle on who and what Freddy actually was, thinking it might help her to figure out what her deal is. You know, I feel kind of like Luke Skywalker, only I don't have a Yoda or a Ben Kenobi to help save me from the dark side. I also don't think there's going to be a last-minute redemption for Freddy Krueger. Maggie, help me take off these burn scars so I can look at you with my own two eyes. Yeah, but you got yourself one hell of a Han Solo to back you up. And I'm just saying, really in the mood to shoot first. Also, I'd be careful comparing yourself to Han Solo, Tracy. You don't want to run into Kylo Fred. Maggie at first doesn't want her to come with, but Tracy won't have it. Oh, cut the poor me lone wolf crap, Maggie. You need someone else with you. I'm the only other person you know who's been to Springwood, faced Freddy, and lived to keep my mouth shut about it. I'm the only one left who's seen Freddy use his most deadly weapon.
Get out of here now, Tracy, now!
Hey, you forgot the power glove!
To tell you the truth, I always thought you were a bitch, but I've learned to deal with it. Unfair, perhaps, but she did have no reaction to one of the kids under her care bouncing around and punching walls while he was stuck in a dream with Freddy, so... As they drive to Springwood, Maggie follows up on that comment. Well, you've always been pretty high-strung. Tracy, sometimes being a counselor is really difficult. Everyone looks at you to help them with their problems, and you want to, but sometimes you've got problems of your own. I mean, you would not believe how common it is for counselors to have serial killers for parents. As they enter Springwood, they spot a construction crew working on setting up a new sign for the town, indicating that things seem to be going better for the place, although not better for that construction worker. What the hell's wrong with his hand? They head for a public library to start with. The librarian doesn't have much on Krueger, but he offers to give them what he has. I'm not used to it here myself yet. I just moved here with my boyfriend. We bought a bunch of houses that we're fixing up. The real estate here is dirt cheap. We really needed a nice, normal place to do real estate stuff after that disaster we had in Amityville. Oh, wait a minute. Freddy Krueger? He was the town serial killer back in the 60s, right? Still don't know why they had an official town serial killer, but hey, at least they voted him out after one term. I'm also a bit iffy on the chronology of him doing his thing in the 60s, but I don't recall them mentioning any specific years for when Freddy was active or when some of the movies took place, especially since some were supposed to be several years apart from one another, despite coming out sooner than that. He recalls that the high school sent over a book filled with newspaper clippings about Krueger, and he gives them that. The book, it turns out, belonged to a kid in Freddy's Dead, much to the sadness of the two. They take the book with them and start examining it, the first clipping about a missing girl named Alice Neely. Maggie has a flashback to when Freddy encountered her, and apparently Freddy was driving around in an ice cream truck or something with the claw hand on and attacked her in broad daylight. So, remind me again why it took 20 kids dying before they caught him? Maggie pulls out a scarf or something from the vision before it evaporates into the ether, causing Tracy to do this. Oh no! Oh no! This is interrupting my freestyling! They head to Freddy's old home, and Maggie has another vision, this time of Freddy as a little kid stomping the ground in anger. Also, he apparently always wore green and red stripes, as did his father, Alice Cooper. I'm not kidding, Freddy's adoptive father in Freddy's Dead was played by Alice Cooper. And he's fairly abusive of Freddy, too. Looks like the girls beat you up again, huh? Guess you ain't learning your lessons good enough. If you had bigger stripes on your shirt, people wouldn't beat you up. Like, seriously, it was goofy enough that he was wearing the red and green stripes as a kid, but his father did too? Then later, as a teenager, he proceeded to murder said adoptive father. I learned my lessons good, didn't I? I learned my lessons! That's great, son. You get an A. One of the things Freddy's Dead also introduced was the idea that Freddy got his powers from goofy-looking dream demon creatures. In 3D! Here we see that they were actually around as far back as his teenage years, which really doesn't make any sense. The movie established that they were very specifically aimed at dreams. Why would they care about some kid murdering his dad? Still, kudos on making them look a lot better than they did in the movie. They also tell Freddy to control his power and consume the life of his father, but before Maggie can find out what that means, Tracy snaps her out of the flashback. They go into the house and to the basement, where a chunk of wall has been smashed open, revealing Freddy's old haunt. It's where he came after he killed people, almost like a trophy room. Maggie feels that Freddy's father is buried in the room, and so they dig up the corpse. Once the corpse is unburied, a spirit leaps out of the body and flies out, causing the house to suddenly collapse in on itself, ending the first issue. Well, you finally put his spirit to rest, Maggie. The case of the missing father is now closed. Issue 2's cover reveals that stuff like the soul tree and the doll and whatnot are actually a border. It's cool and all, but seems like kind of a waste of space as a result. The new elements show that Freddy Krueger was, in fact, a rubber bendy doll with very stiff limbs that was highly flammable. We open a short time later with Tracy on the phone with what seems to be bees, my god. The bees inform her that Doc is in the hospital, having gotten into a car crash. He's okay, but we soon see his leg is broken. Tracy calls him up to recap the events of the first issue to him. Then she started seeing things, like she was having flashbacks to Freddy's past. Turns out Freddy spent a lot of time on the couch watching old reruns of Night Court. She explains that Maggie is still terrified about Freddy taking her over, especially since they're now back in his hometown, and Tracy is inclined to believe something is up, especially after the ghost fled Alice Cooper's body. Once Tracy gets back to the motel they're staying at, she says Doc thinks they should come home, that they're in way over their heads. However, Maggie refuses to leave. She needs to ensure that Freddy stays dead this time. Well, look at it this way. Once the remake hits, he'll technically be dead permanently. The two head to the municipal building to find Maggie's birth certificate and see if there are any legal holdings she's entitled to, but once they get there, she has another flashback of Freddy. This time, it's when Freddy is being dragged in for his trial, with tons of cops, reporters, and onlookers crowding the area. And here's the man of the hour himself, For crying out loud, was that sweater just fused to his skin? Why'd they even let him keep the hat? The flashbacks move right through Maggie, much to her shock, although Tracy notes that she can't see a single thing that she's seeing. In the courtroom, Freddy is shoved into a metal box with glass windows. Look, dude's a serial killer, but is that really necessary? It's not like Freddy is at risk of leaping out and biting the judge's nose off or something. Look, we at the Springwood Police paid a lot of money for our airtight water trap box at the carnival, and damn it, we're gonna get some use out of it! The judge enters and announces that the evidence used to arrest Krueger was illegally obtained and has to be thrown out. Unfortunately, that also means that Freddy's lawyer, a parody of Johnny Cochran, who honestly ends up looking more like Billy D. Williams here, moves for the trial to be thrown out since said evidence is really what the entire case was riding on. The courtroom erupts into yelling from the audience. It's a madhouse. The judge is trying to get everyone to calm down. Unfortunately, it's hard to keep calm when a woman is putting her hand through your head with a 4-foot-long arm! She claims that Freddy is just sitting there feeding on their fear and hate, but we don't really see any evidence of that. The judge calls the lawyers into her chambers, which was apparently a sign for Maggie to become a bobblehead in this panel. In private, Cochran basically says the same thing. Without the tainted evidence, there is no case. What? We have no... Are you as crazy as he is, Shelton? We have the bloody glove he used to butcher those children! They have nothing, Your Honor. Nothing that can legally be used as evidence. The glove and the rest of what they used to smear Mr. Krueger's name. Stopping you right there, dude. Just because they can't legally use this evidence doesn't mean that the evidence doesn't exist anymore. They didn't smear his name. Also, it's hard to claim that his name has been smeared when he's the one walking into court in a Christmas sweater. With no other evidence they can use, the judge dismisses the charges, much to the anger and uproar of everyone else in the courthouse. And just look at how happy that makes the good Mr. Krueger as they let him out of his shackles. Mr. Krueger, are you guilty? Mr. Krueger, could you please admit to your crimes to the free press so we can get the trial back on track? We kind of booked a lot of time to cover this thing and I want a Pulitzer. Maggie wants to follow Krueger out of the court, but he and the rest of the trial vanish. Tracy just kind of rolls her eyes at all this, to Maggie's anger. Why are you being so sarcastic? Look, Maggie, we've been wandering around town for almost 2 days following these weird psychic flashbacks that only you can see. I've helped you dig up a corpse, almost gotten squashed by a collapsing house, and watched you converse with people who aren't really there. Plus, you don't have a clue as to what to do from minute to minute. How do you expect me to react? To be fair, Tracy, you invited yourself on this trip. No use complaining about it now. However, it's a pretty compelling argument in Maggie's eyes, which is why her face suddenly becomes shrouded in shock and darkness. With no way to really respond to that other than, good point, Maggie heads off to go check out the records. Later, they're walking out with what Maggie has found, with her starting with an incomplete sentence. To find out that Krueger had some kind of claim on the old abandoned power plant on the southeast side of town. No one's touched it or the house since his death. Wait, you're acknowledging the power plant thing from the second movie? But not the fact that at least 2 different families have lived in that house since his death? Anyway, ownership of the place reverts to Maggie, which is where they decide to head next, but she has another psychic vision, this time of the cops who had screwed up Krueger's arrest in a cop car in front of them. They're of course pissed off that Krueger walked free and that some of the townspeople are blaming it on them because of their mistake. I'm just mystified that Maggie can overhear this in the car behind them, but psychic vision, whatever. The two say they'll go back and arrest him with a proper search warrant that night, but then come across a mob of townspeople outside of one of the cops' houses screaming for Krueger's blood. The implication is supposed to be that this is 1428 Elm Street, the cop is Nancy's father, that part confirmed later at least, and that Krueger didn't live in the house, but there's quite a bit of evidence in the franchise pointing to that being the case. At first, the mob is ready to attack the 2 cops, but a couple manages to organize the townspeople into instead going after Krueger himself. We even get to see a few cameos from the parents of major characters from the franchise, like Kristen's and Roland's, all discussing whether they should really go and kill Krueger themselves. They head off, and Maggie pursues, I think. Yeah, I've been kind of alluding to this, but the artwork is really not that great. First, we see Maggie and Tracy driving and having a conversation, but apparently it looks like it took Maggie a few minutes to actually answer something Tracy said, since now their car is stopped, and then in the next panel, she's having another vision in the same spot, but she's not in it. The sequential part of this is goofy enough, but then we see stuff like Maggie and Tracy passing through the bodies of these people in the flashbacks, and it just gets sillier. What the hell is with Maggie's arm movements. She looks like she's about to drop a sick rap down on these people. Well, at least we know that musical talent runs in the family.
It's time for our boy to face the music with Rap Master. Ready?
The townspeople enter, though Maggie can't tell at first if Freddy is talking to them or to her. I see you brought some friends this time. That's okay, because I got friends of my own. No one's your friend, Krueger. Hey now, that's just mean. One of the cops grabs Freddy's glove. Hey cop, you got pretty little girls. I'm looking forward to getting to know them better. We're actually both part of the same movie club. I'm really looking forward to meeting some new people. And the cop just tosses the glove back at him in response. Shut up, you monster! Shut up, or I'll give you more things you can defend yourself with! The other cop, whom Freddy now confirms that it's Don Thompson, Nancy's father, is threatened next. And you took my daughter away, Thompson. Nancy's getting just the right age to replace her. What the hell does that even mean? Was Freddy's real plan in the first movie that he wanted Nancy to be a surrogate daughter? And what does that imply about him saying, I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy? The townspeople, Don included, proceed to beat the crap out of him, even stabbing him with some knives. Is that the best you can do? You don't even know what you're fooling around with here! You're the fool, Krueger! Oh man, all these burns and they haven't even set him on fire yet. Speaking of, they pour gasoline on him and one woman lights a match, although the next panel shows that they lit the gasoline from far away. So, did they light the match and walk out, or are they having this conversation from like 30 feet from each other? To add insult to injury, they throw a Molotov cocktail through the window and set the entire place ablaze. The Dream Demons enter and repeat the scene from the 6th movie where they enter into him, although this sequence really doesn't match that one at all, since it was more implied in that film, and later in Freddy vs. Jason, that the townspeople never actually confronted him directly, just used the Molotovs to kill him. Maggie, still in the room with Freddy when all this goes down, suddenly experiences the flames herself, although Tracy can't see anything. However, what she does see is a bunch of light coming out of Maggie's eyes and mouth. Maggie, what's wrong? Oh my god, she's regenerating! Maggie was a Time Lord this entire time! Light continues to emanate from Maggie, now coming out of basically any random spot on her body. And so our comic ends with Maggie disintegrating, and the only thing that's left is Krueger's hat, the sound of laughter filling the abandoned power plant. And that's how the miniseries ended. I mean, yeah, it's because Innovation went bankrupt, but considering the story after this point is the first movie, well, for a series called The Beginning is over. A while ago, Andy Mangels released the incomplete script of issue 3 and the plot line of the entire book on his site. Unfortunately, at the time of this writing, they're dead links, but I managed to get copies. So we do know where the book was mostly headed. From what's in there, it looks like Freddy was indeed doing this to be reborn. Not necessarily through Maggie, but reborn all the same. In the 3rd issue, Maggie would be transported to a vision of hell that sounded fairly grotesque, as it should, along with encountering the Dream Demons again. Tracy, in the meantime, would encounter the ghosts of Freddy's victims, though the script doesn't have any dialogue at that point. And just because I find these bits amusing, 2 excerpts from the script. Close-up of 2 faces framing the panel as Freddy leans into Maggie's face and leers at her, waggling his finger in a no-no movement as to a child. Maggie leans back, scared, or maybe he's got bad breath. Truly Freddy Krueger's most terrifying feature. He puts an almost fatherly arm behind her back, walking her forward, explaining, they're about to enter what could almost be a huge vagina. See H.R. Giger's Alien designs, on the other side of which strange lights blur and whirl in the distance. So when you're dying and you see a light, you're actually seeing a vagina? Maggie scrunches her eyes closed as they squeeze through the goo-filled vagina opening. Some of it oozes on her hair. I would just like to point out that the script for a Nightmare on Elm Street comic contained the words, squeeze through the goo-filled vagina opening. The plot outline, obviously written much earlier, is a bit different. There's no framing story about Maggie seeing all this. Instead, it's all from Freddy's perspective, with the first issue being his trial and death by the townspeople before entering hell. The second issue has him meeting a being who may or may not be the devil, and manages to absorb the souls of the 20 kids he murdered into a twisted mass on his body, a reference to the 3rd movie. In the 3rd issue, he starts haunting the dreams of the Elm Street parents, even managing to kill some of them. The final issue brings us to the events of the first movie as Freddy finally gains the power to bend the reality of dreams to his own ends. These comics are not too terrible, actually. I think I would have preferred the original plot outline since the framing device of Maggie and Tracy doesn't feel like it really adds anything that interesting, especially since the actual prequel bits would have stopped after the second issue and it just becomes another sequel. Still, it gives Maggie a bit more depth and emotion she had in the sixth movie concerning her parentage. I didn't talk about it very much here. And while not intended, with Freddy's presence gone, we can see how the town might be able to rebuild and start heading in the direction we see in Freddy vs. Jason, where things are doing much better for Springwood. The real problem with the book, though, is the artwork. At first, the pacing, especially at the beginning, is very good, but the artists struggle to keep the characters on model, and there's a lot of wonky anatomy and perspective shots. I couldn't find a lot of information on the artists, brothers David and Dan Day, but they did do a lot of horror and black and white art that looks very good for the most part, so I'm not sure what happened in some parts here. But clearly they had some talent despite some hiccups in these comics. But yeah, these two issues are not terrible, not fantastic, but definitely had potential, and it's a pity it was never finished. Next time, however, we revisit the craptacular Avatar Press Nightmare comics with A Nightmare on Elm Street Fear Book. Something we wish was left unfinished. And just so we're keeping score here, Alice Cooper has now been defeated by Peter Frampton, the Bee Gees, and Freddy Krueger.